After the crushing victory over the Helvetii at the Battle of Bibracte, Julius Caesar's legions were both triumphant and weary. The long pursuit of the migrating tribe had ended in a decisive Roman victory, forcing the Helvetii to return to their homeland under Roman terms. Yet Caesar knew that Gaul was far from pacified. His campaign to bring this vast and diverse land under Roman control was only beginning. The Helvetii had been the first to challenge Rome's authority, but they were not the only threat. As word of Caesar's victory spread, the Gallic tribes that had remained neutral during the conflict with the Helvetii began to reconsider their stance. Many had hoped that the Helvetii would weaken Caesar enough to limit his influence in Gaul, but the opposite had happened. Now, Gaul's tribes faced a dilemma: submit to Rome's growing power or risk being conquered one by one. But there was another force at play in Gaul, one that Caesar had yet to confront directly: the Germans. For years, Germanic tribes had been crossing the Rhine, pushing deeper into Gaul, displacing local tribes and threatening the stability of the region. Among them, one leader had risen to power, a king named Ariovistus. A chieftain of the Suebi, Ariovistus had established himself as a formidable presence in Gaul, ruling over the Sequani tribe and commanding a powerful coalition of German warriors. Ariovistus had initially been on good terms with Rome. In fact, the Roman Senate had even granted him the title of Friend of the Roman People, when his influence in Gaul had seemed useful to Roman interests. But times had changed. With Caesar's ambitions in Gaul becoming clear, Ariovistus no longer saw Rome as an ally. Instead, he viewed the Roman presence as a direct threat to his power. Tensions between Ariovistus and Caesar were inevitable, and it wasn't long before they came to a head. The Aedui, a Gallic tribe allied with Rome, had been suffering under the dominance of Ariovistus and his Germanic forces. They appealed to Caesar for help, reminding him of their alliance and pleading for Roman intervention. Caesar, eager to remove any rival power from Gaul and consolidate his control, decided that the time had come to confront Ariovistus directly. But Caesar was no fool. He understood that Ariovistus commanded a formidable force, one bolstered by the fierce reputation of Germanic warriors. Unlike the Helvetii, the Germans were not fleeing or seeking new lands. They were conquerors, and they intended to remain in Gaul. If Caesar were to defeat Ariovistus, it would not be a simple matter of outmaneuvering a migrating tribe. This would be a direct confrontation with a powerful king and his battle-hardened warriors. With the decision made, Caesar began preparations for the campaign. His legions, fresh from their victory over the Helvetii, were experienced and battle-ready, but they would be facing an entirely different kind of enemy. The Germans were known for their ferocity, their reliance on fast-moving cavalry, and their sheer physical power. Caesar's strategy would need to adapt to these new conditions. Before committing his forces, Caesar attempted diplomacy. He sent envoys to Ariovistus, requesting a meeting to discuss terms. But Ariovistus, confident in his position and unwilling to cede any ground to the Romans, responded with contempt. He refused to meet with Caesar and made it clear that he would not tolerate any Roman interference in his affairs. The message was unmistakable. Ariovistus considered Gaul his domain, and Caesar was an invader. This rebuff only strengthened Caesar's resolve. He could not allow a rival like Ariovistus to challenge Rome's authority in Gaul. War was now inevitable. Caesar's legions marched north into the territory controlled by Ariovistus, determined to bring the German king to battle. As they advanced, reports came in from scouts and local tribes, painting a grim picture of Ariovistus' forces. The German king had gathered a massive army, one that far outnumbered Caesar's legions. Caesar, however, remained undaunted. His confidence in his men and his own tactical genius gave him the edge he needed. He knew that the discipline and experience of the Roman legions would outweigh the raw power of the Germanic warriors. But there was still one crucial element missing. He needed to draw Ariovistus out into the open, where his legions could fight on favourable ground. Ariovistus, for his part, was not eager to engage Caesar directly. Despite his bravado, the German king knew that the Roman legions were not to be underestimated. He had hoped that his initial show of defiance would cause Caesar to back down, but the Roman general had pressed forward. Now, Ariovistus found himself in a difficult position. His army was large, but it was also composed of warriors from different tribes, many of whom had little loyalty to him. If Caesar could find a way to exploit this weakness, the German coalition could fall apart. The standoff between the two armies lasted for days. Caesar's legions camped near the Vosges Mountains, while Ariovistus kept his forces on high ground, avoiding a direct confrontation. Skirmishes broke out along the edges of the battlefield, with Roman cavalry testing the German lines and probing for weaknesses. But the full-scale battle that both leaders knew was coming had yet to occur. Frustrated by the stalemate, Caesar decided to take a more aggressive approach. He ordered his legions to march closer to the German camp, hoping to provoke Ariovistus into action. The gamble worked. Unwilling to allow the Romans to move any closer, Ariovistus finally agreed to a meeting with Caesar. The two leaders met in a neutral location between their armies, each surrounded by a small escort of their most trusted men. The meeting was tense from the start. Caesar, ever the diplomat, offered Ariovistus terms that would allow him to retain his power in Gaul, but under Roman oversight. Ariovistus, however, had no interest in being a Roman puppet. He demanded that Caesar withdraw from Gaul entirely and allow the Germans to expand their influence as they saw fit. The negotiation quickly broke down, and both men returned to their camps, knowing that the time for words was over. The next morning, the armies prepared for battle. Caesar's legions, well rested and organized, formed up in their traditional lines, ready to meet the Germanic charge. Across the field, Ariovistus's warriors prepared for a different kind of fight. The Germans relied on shock and intimidation, charging at full speed in an attempt to break the enemy's line with brute force. They had used this tactic successfully against the Gauls, but Caesar was confident that his disciplined soldiers could withstand the initial onslaught. The Battle of the Vosges began with a thunderous clash. The Germans charged, their warriors howling as they hurled themselves at the Roman lines. Caesar's legions stood firm, their shields locked together in a nearly impenetrable wall. The first wave of Germans crashed against the Roman line, but the legions held. Slowly, methodically, Caesar's soldiers began to push back, using their short swords to cut down the Germans at close range. Ariovistus, seeing that his initial attack had failed to break the Romans, threw his cavalry into the fray. German horsemen, armed with long spears, rode into the Roman flanks, hoping to exploit any weakness in Caesar's formation. But Caesar had anticipated this move. He had placed his own cavalry, bolstered by allied Gallic horsemen, on the flanks, ready to counter any cavalry assault. The two mounted forces collided in a brutal melee, but once again Roman discipline won out. As the battle wore on, the tide began to turn in Caesar's favour. The Germans, unable to break the Roman lines, began to tire. Their disorganized charges became less effective, and Caesar's legions took advantage. With a single command, Caesar ordered a full advance. The Roman legions surged forward, cutting through the German ranks with precision. The German warriors, seeing that the battle was lost, began to retreat. Ariovistus, watching from a distance, realized that his position was untenable. He had underestimated Caesar and the strength of the Roman legions. The German king fled the battlefield with a small retinue of loyal warriors, abandoning his army to the Romans. By the end of the day, the battlefield was littered with the bodies of fallen Germans, while Caesar's legions stood victorious once again. The Battle of the Vosges marked a turning point in Caesar's Gallic campaign. With Ariovistus defeated and his army shattered, the Germanic threat in Gaul was effectively neutralized. Caesar's reputation as a military commander grew even stronger, and the tribes of Gaul, seeing the fate of Ariovistus, began to realize that resistance to Rome was futile. But Caesar knew that his work in Gaul was far from over. Other challenges awaited him, and he was ready to face them.